He believed that a woman could not defeat a man in combat. He laughed, humiliated her, and challenged her to a duel right there in the hall. But a few minutes later, in the ring, he begged for the fight to be stopped. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The gym didn't smell like success or glory. It smelled like sweat, rust, and time. Forge House was the kind of place where ambitions came to bleed and steel was tested in silence, not selfies. Located in a forgotten corner of Van Nuys, it had stood for nearly 30 years, a stubborn relic among polished franchise gyms with their smoothies and playlists. Its walls were lined with yellowing fight posters, some curled at the corners, others peeling like old skin. The mats were uneven and slick in places where too many shoes had ground chalk and effort into permanent stains. Heavy bags swung with bruised dignity from rusty chains, and the fluorescent lights flickered with the sort of resentment only old wiring can convey. Here, fighters weren't trained. They were forged, or so said the cracked lettering above the office door. Forge House. One way in. That kind of bravado used to attract the best, or at least the most desperate. Lately, it drew a mix. Former hopefuls past their prime, overconfident amateurs, and a few rising talents convinced that brutality was a shortcut to greatness. It was also a place where ego strutted freely, and sexism passed as tradition. Women trained here, yes, but rarely stayed long. The unspoken rule was simple. If you couldn't take being mocked, you didn't belong. No one enforced it more than Ryan Draper. Ryan had once fought professionally. 3 fights in Bellator, 2 losses, and 1 forgettable decision win that he never stopped referencing. His career had fizzled out just as his notoriety was beginning to bloom, and, like many men with too much muscle and too little introspection, he found refuge in becoming a coach. He molded fighters the way he wished he had been molded, with aggression, contempt for weakness, and disdain for anything that didn't fit his idea of toughness. To Ryan, toughness meant not caring who you stepped on, and it especially meant reminding every woman who walked into his gym that she didn't belong unless she could humiliate someone first. The morning she walked in, no one gave her more than a glance. She wore a plain gray hoodie, slightly oversized, the hood pulled low enough to cast a soft shadow across her eyes. Black track pants, nondescript sneakers, no logos, no shine. She carried a duffel bag that had seen better years. Her shoulders moved with the controlled fluidity of someone used to occupying her space carefully. Not timid, watchful. "Name?" asked the guy at the front desk, a young kid with earphones in and a protein shake balanced on the keyboard. "R. Rose," she said, her voice flat and polite. He scrawled the name onto a visitor log without looking up, gesturing vaguely toward the mats. "Try not to get killed." The gym was already alive with noise, gloves popping against pads, metal clanging from the weight area, occasional shouts from the ring. Ryan's voice boomed from the far corner where he was running a sparring drill, barking instructions between curses. She moved with a calm purpose to an empty section of mats and began her warm-up. Neck rolls, shoulder rotations, high knees. Nothing flashy, nothing demanding attention. Within minutes, the eyes began. A pair of mid-level guys paused mid-rap to nudge each other. "Another Instagram chick," one muttered. "Look at those hands, soft. She won't last a week." Still, they watched. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in that lean, powerful way athletes often are, but because she didn't look afraid, or impressed. And she moved like someone who knew more than she let on. She didn't ask for help, didn't try to join a group, just went through her routine with mechanical precision. Shadow boxing, slow sprawls, light footwork. Her breathing never changed. Her posture stayed relaxed. Ryan didn't notice her until she stepped into the cage during a rotation meant for sparring pairs. He walked over with that swagger he thought was charm and looked her up and down like he was picking meat. "Hey, sweetheart, yoga's next door. Unless you're here to model gloves." She looked at him, not up, not down. Just met his eyes with a quiet stillness that somehow shifted the temperature in the room. "I'm here to train." Ryan grinned, turning to the watching group. "You hear that, boys? She's here to train." Laughter followed, the kind that seeks permission. Ryan gave it. She didn't flinch. "Fine, you get one round, light spar. Carlos, you're up. Don't kill her." Carlos was 23, stocky, strong, and eager to impress. He stepped into the cage with the same grin his coach wore, gloves already laced. She adjusted her wraps. No mouthpiece, no headgear. Ryan raised a hand. "Keep it clean, play nice." The bell rang. Carlos lunged fast, maybe to end it quickly, maybe just to knock her off balance. She slipped left, grabbed his wrist mid-strike, pivoted, and dropped him flat with a foot sweep so smooth it looked rehearsed. He hit the mat with a loud thud and a confused grunt. Before he could react, her knee was on his chest, her forearm pressing his throat. She held it just long enough. Then she stood, offered no smile, no gloat, just backed away. The room was silent for half a second, and then the sarcasm returned. "Guess she took a jiu-jitsu class once." "Fluke?" Carlos rolled out of the cage, red-faced and panting. Ryan stared, jaw tight. "You've got attitude. Let's see if you've got gas," he said to her. "Come back tomorrow." She did, and the day after, and the one after that. He gave her the worst partners, made her clean mats, insisted she demonstrate techniques she clearly mastered, then corrected her in front of everyone. She never protested. She trained harder, focused. When the other women drifted toward yoga or light bag work, she stayed in the cage, rolling with the big guys, letting them try to muscle her, letting them fail. He upped the humiliation, called her names, laughed at her endurance drills, told her she was just another hype-hunting nobody. She said nothing until Thursday. On Thursday, he paired her with Marcus, a regional amateur with 2 fights, all attitude and bad footwork. Midway through their round, he got frustrated when she countered him 3 times in a row. He grabbed her behind the neck and tried to throw her sideways. She ducked under, twisted, and caught him in a standing armbar before he knew what happened. He tapped in 2 seconds. Loud. The room exploded, not in applause, in disbelief. Ryan crossed the floor with fury in his stride. He stepped into the cage, hands on hips. "You think you're clever? You want to stay in this gym, you earn your place. Let's give the people a show. Sunday, exhibition round. You and me." The others fell quiet. Half of them smirked, expecting a public takedown. The other half didn't know what to expect anymore. She nodded once. "No talking," Ryan spat. "Fine, you'll talk Sunday, with your fists." She walked away, grabbed her duffel, and left. No fanfare, no retorts. As the door closed behind her, a murmur ran through the group. Who is she? Nobody knew. Not yet. The day after Ryan Draper's public challenge, Forge House buzzed with attention that hadn't existed before. Normally, Thursdays were just another day. Morning circuits, afternoon pad work, maybe a few late-night rolls under flickering lights. But now, something else pulsed beneath the surface. The gym was alive in a way it hadn't been in years, electric with anticipation. Phones flicked open between sets, group chats filled with speculation, and whispers spread like wildfire through locker rooms and sideline benches. Some laughed it off, a petty stunt to boost Ryan's profile. Others started watching videos, taking a second glance at the stranger in the hoodie. Still, the dominant narrative was his. Ryan took the initiative the moment she walked out of the cage. That night, he uploaded a 30-second promo video from the office, backdropped by dim lighting and cracked fight posters, his arms folded, smirk plastered on his face like a war medal. "This Sunday," he said into the lens, voice thick with performative menace, "we settle this. A little exhibition match. Me and, well, whatever she is. Come see the difference between hype and reality." The clip ended with a slow zoom into his logo, a battered anvil overlaid with the words "Real Fighters Only." Within hours, it was shared across a dozen local fight pages and MMA fan accounts. One blog reposted it under the headline, "Trainer Challenges Mystery Woman After Getting Showed Up in Gym." Another took a bolder route. Ryan Draper to humble feminist choke artist in public beatdown. The comments were exactly as expected. Hundreds of fire emojis, clapping hands, testosterone-laced support, and a sprinkling of misogynistic bravado disguised as humor. But in between those comments, threads began to sprout. Questions. Freeze frames. Anyone else notice the way she moved? Look at that transition, cleaner than half the pros. One user posted a blurry screenshot from the sparring match and asked, "Is that Ronda Rousey?" No one took it seriously. "She's too short. Nah, Ronda's retired. That chick wouldn't show up to a dump like Forge House." Meanwhile, the woman they speculated about was training in complete silence on the edge of the city. Not in a gym. Not under fluorescent lights or in front of punching bags surrounded by phones. She trained in an old garage, its floor lined with worn mats and the dull gleam of rusted weight plates. There was no music. Just breath and movement, muscle and memory. The garage belonged to her uncle, a man who'd spent decades fixing engines and avoiding people. He didn't ask questions when she arrived earlier that year. He just cleared a space and handed her a key. The only light came through the cracked windows, dust catching in sunbeams like fragments of the past refusing to settle. Here, she could move without being watched. Here, the rhythm returned. Elbows flowed through space like water. Her footwork, once frantic and furious, had become something deliberate and intimate. She still carried the speed. The strength was still there, but now it was quiet, rooted. She had always been fast, explosive, a force of nature, they used to say, but what the crowds never understood and what the cameras never showed was the discipline beneath the storm. The years of falling on mats, the bruised knuckles soaked in Epsom salt, the heartbreak of failure layered between 10-second finishes. When she lost, the world mourned the myth. She had to mourn the woman. In those final UFC days, she became a spectacle. Her victories were recorded in slow motion, her defeats dissected by strangers with microphones. She became a brand, a hashtag, a flame that burned too bright. And when it was over, no one stayed to see her clean the ashes. So, she left. Not just the ring. Everything. She stopped giving interviews, declined reality shows, turned down deals. She changed her number, erased her social media, and learned to live without applause. She moved through cities like a shadow, worked odd jobs, changed names, slipped in and out of gyms until even her own reflection started to forget what it had been. Until Forge House. It hadn't been planned. She was passing through, visiting a former judo teammate in Sherman Oaks, and decided to get a session in. Just stretch, move. But once she stepped on the mats, the part of her that still loved the feel of the fight, the quiet precision of it, woke up. And when the trainer opened his mouth, when he looked at her like she didn't belong, the decision made itself. She had nothing to prove. But sometimes silence needs an audience. The gym treated the upcoming exhibition like a spectacle. Posters were taped to the walls. Someone designed a crude graphic for Instagram: Draper versus Rose Sunday Showdown. Ryan leaned into it with all the subtlety of a carnival barker. He mocked her in stories, took selfies with his fighters, captioning them, "Real fighters don't wear ponytails." His TikTok showed clips of him lifting weights with the tagline, "Preparing to take out the trash." The irony, of course, was that every time he posted, more people started looking into her. Still, the gym's inner circle remained loyal. Even those who suspected something was off dismissed their doubts. Ryan was loud, but he'd been there for them when no one else was. He paid fees when fighters were broke. Let some of them crash in the back room. People forgave his attitude because it was familiar, because it was easier than questioning everything. And then there was Mateo. 21, lanky, earnest. He wasn't the strongest in the gym or the fastest, but he listened, took notes, stayed after class to mop the mats without being asked. He'd seen her first day, had sparred near her, watched the economy and her movements. He saw the tension in her hands, the way she watched with complete stillness. She reminded him of the old DVDs his dad kept: Pride Fights, Olympic Judo, early UFC, Legends. He wanted to ask her, "Who are you, really?" But every time he approached, something in her posture told him not to. Still, something gnawed at him. On Friday afternoon, while the others practiced striking drills, Mateo sat in the corner with his phone, scrubbing through old fight clips. He didn't even know what he was looking for, just a glimmer. And then he found it. A video from 2011, Judo World Championships. The woman on screen was younger, but the stance was identical. The eyes, the way she dropped her hips before a throw. He froze. When he tried to tell the others, they laughed. "She's too old. She'd never show up here. Keep dreaming." But he knew, and he felt ashamed. Saturday came quickly, the day before the match. Ryan took the afternoon off to get a haircut, made a video about how he was going to show what happens when keyboard warriors step into the cage. A local fight podcast offered to live stream the match, and he accepted instantly. He invited influencers, prepped a mini stage with lights borrowed from a nearby kickboxing gym, even arranged for a smoke machine at the entrance. He was ready for his moment. She wasn't. She sat on the floor of her garage that evening, legs crossed, eyes closed. She wasn't meditating in the traditional sense. There were no mantras, no breathing cycles, just stillness. Her bag was already packed, her wraps laid out beside her. In the corner of the room stood a dusty photo. Her mother in a G, arm raised after a win. Ronda had carried that photo across 3 states, 5 addresses, and the crumbling stages of a vanished career. It reminded her of why she started. Not to win, but to belong. Somewhere. She didn't turn on her phone. She didn't watch Ryan's posts. She didn't need to. The next day, the world would talk. They would analyze, speculate, cheer, or condemn. But none of it mattered now. Because in less than 24 hours, under cheap lights in a cracked octagon surrounded by men who thought she was invisible, she would show them. Not for fame, not for revenge, but because some battles weren't about proving someone wrong. They were about remembering who you were before the noise. And she remembered now. The morning sun in Los Angeles rose pale and indifferent, washing the streets in muted gold as if trying to delay the inevitability of the day. The city had moved on as it always did, coffee brewed, tires screeched, radios hummed, but in one pocket of Van Nuys, in a weather-beaten warehouse retrofitted into a makeshift arena, the air carried a different kind of weight. Forge House had transformed. The rough gym that usually stank of old mats and ambition had been cleaned, or at least swept hastily. Posters hung unevenly on temporary walls, wires crisscrossed the rafters, and foldable chairs formed a ring around the worn cage in the center of the room. A small stage had been erected, borrowed from a local community theater, barely strong enough to hold lights now aimed at the octagon like spotlights on a gladiatorial pit. The seats began to fill long before noon. Local bloggers set up tripods and laptops on the back benches. Amateurs with cameras jostled for good angles, shouting over each other about frame rates and battery packs. Small-time fight fans filtered in, lured by the promise of free admission and the tantalizing prospect of blood. Ryan's name had spread quickly online in the last 48 hours. The words exhibition match were used like bait, and he had no intention of disappointing anyone who showed up expecting a show. He arrived dressed to match the occasion. Red fight shorts, black Forge House tank top, custom gloves, and a smirk he wore like armor. His hair was freshly buzzed, beard trimmed, and as he walked the floor with his crew trailing behind him, it was clear he thought this day belonged to him. The gym's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above him, adding a low hum to the rising energy in the room. He slapped hands with a few regulars, posed for pictures, and made sure every camera got a good look at him. "Today," he said into a handheld mic hooked to his shirt, "we remind people that fighting isn't cosplay. It's earned." The audience, already buzzing with anticipation, let out a round of cheers and hoots. A few people laughed when he added, "And maybe we finally silence whatever fantasy this woman's riding in on." Behind the scenes, Ronda sat alone in the small changing area set aside for her. She hadn't asked for it. One of the young staffers, unsure of what else to do, had simply gestured to the corner behind a makeshift curtain and muttered, "You can get ready here." She hadn't answered. Her duffel bag sat neatly beside her, her old fight gear laid out carefully. No one from the gym offered to help with her wraps. No cameras were there to catch her lacing her gloves. She didn't warm up the way most fighters did, not with loud hits or hyped routines. She closed her eyes and breathed. The noise from the arena filtered in, faint but constant. She could hear Ryan's voice on the mic, the crowd's growing response, the artificial buildup. It didn't affect her. This was no different than any of the 1,000 times she had waited behind the curtain in some venue, about to walk into a ring, a cage, a moment. And yet, it was completely different. Because this time, there were no expectations. No pay-per-view banners. No entourage. No Dana White waiting backstage. No legacy hanging over her like a shadow. She had entered anonymously, accepted the challenge quietly, and now stood on the edge of doing what she had always done best: face a fight with nothing but herself. The music outside changed to a pulsing, bass-heavy beat. Ryan's walkout song. The crowd roared as he emerged through the smoke machine they'd borrowed from a third-rate DJ. He bounced on the balls of his feet, pointed to the ceiling, and flexed for the cameras. Someone threw a Forge House t-shirt from the front row, and he caught it with a grin, tossing it back to a cheering fan. He entered the cage with the confidence of a man convinced the narrative belonged to him. Backstage, someone finally tapped the curtain and said, "You're up." No name, no fanfare, just a signal. Ronda stood, pulled her hoodie tight, and picked up her gloves. She walked out without music, without lights. The sound of the crowd changed almost instantly. It wasn't cheering, it wasn't even booing. It was confusion. She stepped into the light. No one knew how to react. Dressed in a plain black sports top, faded judo pants, and old gloves that had clearly seen more years than most of the fans watching, she didn't look like a challenger. She didn't even look like a fighter. She looked like someone who had come to fix the floor. But then a ripple passed through the crowd. Someone leaned over to a friend and whispered, "She looks familiar." Another pulled out their phone and started scrolling frantically. A group of young women in the back row stood up, mouths slightly open. It only took one word. "Rousey." The name spread like a brush fire. At first it was a whisper, then a murmur, then a wave. Eyes widened, phones lifted. Someone gasped. Another dropped their drink. Ronda ignored all of it. She stepped into the cage the way she always had, with quiet certainty and absolute focus. Ryan didn't notice. He was too busy posturing, shadowboxing in the corner and talking to his assistant coach about when to initiate the takedown. The referee, a young man named Dale, who had officiated local bouts for a couple years, looked more nervous than either fighter. He held his hand up between them and began the standard instructions, but his voice trembled just slightly. "This is an exhibition bout, 1 5-minute round. Keep it clean, respect each other, protect yourselves at all times." Ryan offered a quick, smug fist bump. Ronda met it, eyes steady, no words. The referee stepped back. The bell rang. Ryan came out fast. He always did. Forward pressure was his trademark. Smother them early, establish control, never let them find their rhythm. He opened with a low jab, followed by a quick inside leg kick, then circled to her left, trying to push her toward the cage wall. Ronda didn't react. She didn't backpedal. She didn't counter. She watched. He feinted high, then shot low, going for a classic single-leg takedown. It worked on most people. It didn't even come close. Ronda stepped laterally, let his shoulder slide past her hip, and turned just enough to make him stumble. The crowd laughed, not at him, not yet, but in surprise. He recovered quickly, gritted his teeth, and came at her harder. The next 30 seconds were a blur of motion. He threw hooks, jabs, a looping overhand right that would have clipped most fighters. She wasn't there. She wasn't just dodging. She was redirecting, letting his energy pass through her like wind through an open door. The more he moved, the calmer she seemed. Then she stepped forward. One step. Not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. And the fight changed. Ryan hesitated. Just a fraction. Enough. Ronda feinted left, pivoted inside, and clinched. Her arms wrapped around his upper torso in a grip so smooth the audience didn't even register what had happened until his back was off the mat and his feet were in the air. She threw him, not violently, not cruelly, with the grace of a judoka who had practiced the same movement 10,000 times. He landed flat, breath knocked from his lungs. Before he could scramble, she was on him. Full mount, controlled posture, one hand on his collarbone, the other isolating his arm. He bucked. She adjusted. He bridged. She flowed. The audience was dead silent. Then she transitioned. Quick, sharp, clean. She slid her legs, locked his elbow, and arched. Armbar. The same move she'd won dozens of fights with, refined into something surgical. He tapped. The sound was small, desperate. The referee dove in. "That's it." The bell never rang. Ronda released the hold immediately, stood, and stepped away. She didn't raise her arms, didn't smile. She waited until Ryan sat up, clutching his arm in disbelief, then turned and walked to the edge of the cage. The noise came slowly, building in waves. Not the rowdy cheers Ryan had hoped for, not the bloodthirsty roar of a knockout. Something deeper. Awareness, recognition, respect. A young woman in the front row stood on her seat and clapped with both hands above her head. A man beside her dropped his phone in shock. Even the bloggers had stopped recording, unsure if what they saw had actually happened. In the center of the cage, Ryan sat dazed. Sweat dripped from his forehead. His mouth hung open. He looked across at the woman who had just dismantled him and saw, finally, unmistakably, her. Ronda Rousey. He tried to stand, fell back. No one helped him. She didn't look back. By the time the announcer returned to the cage, she was already gone. No interview, no speech, no statement. Only silence, footsteps, and the echo of a legend who had never needed a microphone to speak. The crowd didn't leave quickly. They lingered, sat in stunned silence, uploaded shaky footage to Instagram and whispered things like, "Did that really happen?" Mateo, standing near the back with his phone at his side, didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He knew what they had all just seen. A reminder, a reckoning, a return. The silence inside Forge House after Ronda's departure was unlike any silence that place had ever known. Not the kind that came after a knockout or during a grueling last round when fighters gasped for air. This silence was heavier, thoughtful, as if the very walls were ashamed of how they had behaved. People lingered long after the so-called exhibition was over, not to celebrate, not to gossip, but because something fundamental had shifted in the air. They had come expecting a show, a humiliation, a viral clip to laugh at later. What they had witnessed instead was a kind of truth they hadn't expected to find in a cage surrounded by folding chairs. Ryan Draper remained seated on the edge of the mat for nearly 10 minutes. His arm throbbed, but it wasn't the pain that kept him grounded. It was something far worse. Recognition. Embarrassment. A slow, dawning understanding that everything he thought he controlled had unraveled in less than 3 minutes. He had walked into the cage as a man certain of his own dominance. He had left it not just defeated, but exposed. No one said much to him afterward. The assistants who had earlier buzzed around him with clipboards and camera angles disappeared. The younger fighters, once eager to chant his name, moved silently to the lockers, eyes averted. Mateo passed by him with a towel slung over his shoulder and paused briefly, wanting to speak, but the moment was too fragile. He nodded instead and continued on. Ryan never lifted his head. Outside, the crowd trickled into the street. The energy had turned. Phones were held up now with reverence, not mockery. Social media exploded with shaky videos and stunned captions. She didn't even flinch. That was Ronda Rousey? Draper got folded by a ghost. The clips went viral within an hour. By evening, her name was trending worldwide. Blogs published timelines. MMA analysts dissected every frame. The same sites that had posted Ryan's promotional videos now featured stills of Ronda's calm expression as she locked in the armbar. Sports anchors debated the ethics of staged exhibitions without realizing the irony of questioning the only honest fight they'd seen in months. But Ronda wasn't watching. She had already changed into a fresh set of clothes and disappeared down the alley behind the building, moving like someone who'd done this before, entered unnoticed, left unseen. She didn't take questions. She didn't sign autographs. She didn't even look back. The job was done, and she carried it with her in the same silence she had carried everything else for the past several years. Across town, in an apartment that had once felt too small and now felt cavernous, Ryan sat alone on his couch, the lights off, a bag of ale cradled against his elbow. His phone vibrated nonstop on the table, alive with mentions, tags, messages. At first, he let it buzz, jaw clenched, refusing to engage. Then, curiosity broke through. He unlocked the screen. Thousands of notifications, some from fans who had turned vicious. Others from former colleagues, some smug, some surprised. A few offered awkward condolences, but the videos were everywhere, each one from a different angle. The same fight replayed on loop, only 30 seconds long, but packed with enough precision and humiliation to crush a man who'd built himself on image. He replayed it, the feint, the clinch, the throw, then again, the mount, the shift, the armbar. Her face never changed. He paused on the final frame, Ronda standing over him, stepping away, her back already turning. She hadn't gloated, hadn't lingered. She hadn't even looked at him again. He'd never felt more invisible in his life. He lowered the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. He didn't return to Forge House the next day. Word spread fast. The gym opened as usual, but without its leader. The regulars filed in, uncertain whether they should continue as if nothing had happened. Mateo took over the warm-up drills, too focused to worry about whether anyone would object. The music was softer, the chatter quieter. Even the heavy bags seemed reluctant to swing too hard. Something had been extracted from the air. A swagger, a smugness, a belief that the loudest voice owned the room. Some of the newer female members returned that week, tentatively. No one sneered at them, no one asked if they were lost. By Wednesday, Ryan showed up. He didn't storm in, didn't command attention. He walked through the doors wearing a plain hoodie and sweatpants, no logo, no posturing. The only thing in his hands was a duffel bag, the same one he used to bring to fights back when he still had something to prove. People noticed but didn't speak. They moved around him like he was something breakable. He walked past the front desk, nodded at the receptionist, and made his way to the back where the office sat half-lit and cluttered. He didn't train that day. He sat alone in the office with the door cracked open, listening to the familiar rhythm of pads, grunts, and the occasional clang of weights hitting the floor. The gym was moving on. It didn't need his permission. The following evening, he recorded a video. Not in the cage, not in the center of the gym. He sat on the edge of the mat, in the corner, where the light was softest and the camera angle didn't flatter. No music, no filters, no editing, just a man with an ice pack on his elbow and a microphone in his lap. "I don't have a script," he began, "and I'm not going to make excuses." He stared into the lens, then looked away. What happened Sunday wasn't a show, it was a reminder. One I needed more than I thought. He paused again. I thought I knew everything. Thought I was tough. I thought a lot of things. That women couldn't fight at this level. That being loud meant being strong. That making people feel small made me bigger. He exhaled slowly. I was wrong. He didn't mention her name. He didn't have to. I lost. Not just the match. I lost the part of myself that thought I didn't need to learn anymore, and I guess, if I'm being honest, I'm grateful for that. The video ended with no call to action, no logo, no apology, just honesty. And it spread. Not as fast as the fight clips, but it spread. People reacted with a kind of restrained surprise. Some mocked him anyway. Some applauded the humility. Others remained skeptical. But those who trained, those who understood what it meant to be broken open and rebuilt in the gym, saw something else. They saw a man letting go of a shell he'd outgrown. Across town, Ronda sat in the corner of a small gym that no one knew she ran. It didn't have a sign. It wasn't listed online. It operated out of a converted dance studio near Echo Park, and it was filled with girls. Some were teenagers from tough homes. Others were survivors. A few had fought their way out of worse things than cages. She didn't charge them. She taught them discipline, structure, defense. She gave them space to be strong without being seen. It was the only place she still allowed herself to lead. That week, one of the girls asked her a question during cool down. "Why did you go back?" "To fight." Ronda thought for a moment. Then she looked at the girl's bruised wrist and the way her knuckles trembled slightly after sparring. She didn't answer with words. She took the girl's hand, adjusted her stance, and showed her how to balance again. That was the answer. Later, alone in the locker room, Ronda opened her phone for the first time in days. Mateo had sent a message. It was short. "Thank you." No question, no fanfare. She stared at it for a while. Then she put the phone away. Some things didn't need a reply. A few days later, Forge House changed. Someone took down the old posters with Ryan's slogans. New flyers appeared on the bulletin board: self-defense classes, women's fundamentals, open roles. The front desk added a donation jar labeled scholarships for fighters in transition. The energy shifted. Not overnight, but slowly, like healing. One morning, Ryan returned not in coaching clothes but in gym gear. He signed in like everyone else, took his place at the back of the line during drills. No one gave him special treatment. No one asked him to speak. He rolled with the beginners, took corrections without protest, lost rounds, tapped often, and came back the next day. He was rebuilding, not rebranding. That was the difference. The world would move on from the story soon. The headlines would fade, the algorithms would latch on to something else. But those who saw it, really saw it, would remember. Not the shock, not the twist, but the weight of what it meant to be humbled without being destroyed. And somewhere out there, Ronda Rousey walked another quiet street, training another quiet fighter, reminding the world that real strength doesn't scream. It listens. It learns. And sometimes it simply steps away. The mornings in the small training space Ronda had quietly carved out in East Los Angeles began early, long before the city stirred. The old hardwood floors still bore the faded scuffs of the ballet classes the studio once hosted. Now, instead of pirouettes and plies, the room held the sound of soft thuds against mats, labored breathing, and quiet instruction. The mirrors were covered with neutral-colored fabric to keep the focus internal. No one needed to look at their reflection here. They were taught to feel instead: balance, tension, breath. The women who came to this place weren't training for belts or sponsors. Some came with bruises half healed, others with the hollowed expressions of long-term survival. Some had been through courts, shelters, foster care. A few had fought their way off sidewalks. They arrived tense, guarded, expecting to be sized up or dismissed. But Ronda never asked questions. She never required explanations. The mat was a clean slate. She welcomed them, not with words, but with structure. The ritual of movement, discipline, and safety. It was in this space that she found purpose again, not in glory, but in service. Each day began with drills, rec falls, breath control, light grappling, then transitions, posture training, and situational defense. Nothing flashy, nothing designed for cameras. Her methods were stripped down, simple, effective. She rarely demonstrated with force. She didn't need to. Her presence carried the weight of someone who had lived through it all and returned, not to reclaim anything but to give what remained. The room had no framed photos, no trophies, but in one corner behind a row of folded mats stood a small wooden box with a few personal items: an old judo belt, a pair of worn gloves, and a faded photograph of her mother raising her arm in victory. She never pointed them out. The students didn't ask. But the box was a kind of anchor, and on rare mornings Ronda would sit beside it in silence before the doors opened. Word of her work began to spread in the quiet way that mattered most. Social workers told one another. One girl brought her sister. Another told her probation officer. Within months, the small room was nearly always full. Still, Ronda never expanded, never sought funding. She believed in the intimacy of the space, the quiet transmission of strength, one person at a time. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, months after the Forge House exhibition, that Ryan Draper walked through her door. He wore a plain gray shirt, gym pants, and brought no gear. He stood in the entryway for several seconds, unsure whether to step in. Ronda was demonstrating a basic ground transition with two of the newer girls. She didn't look up right away. When she finally met his eyes, her expression didn't change. No surprise, no hostility, just a calm acknowledgement. He nodded once. She returned it. After class, he waited by the wall as the students rolled up mats and gathered their belongings. He said nothing, made no attempt to interject. When the last girl left, Ronda approached him. "You looking for a spot?" she asked, her voice even. "Only if it's earned," he said. She studied him for a moment, then turned and walked to the back closet. When she returned, she handed him a folded G. It was old but clean. Classes resumed the next day. Ryan didn't ask to lead. He started on the mat like everyone else. He partnered with whomever was available. Often, that meant training with girls half his size. He took instructions quietly, focused on the drills, made his mistakes without defensiveness. When he tapped early. When corrected, he nodded. When tired, he pushed through. He never tried to reclaim authority. That part of him, whatever was left of the self-appointed expert, had been burned away under the lights of the cage months before. Some of the students recognized him from the video. Others didn't care. No one treated him like a coach anymore. And he didn't seem to want them to. The atmosphere of the space didn't shift with his presence. Ronda ensured that. She didn't change her tone, didn't adjust her methods. If anything, she held him to a stricter standard, insisting on cleaner form, steadier breathing, tighter transitions. He never complained. One evening, after drills, he remained on the mat long after the others had gone. Ronda was wiping down the wall pads when he finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what you did," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. "Not the arm bar," he clarified. "The way you let me walk out with dignity. You didn't embarrass me. You dismantled me." Ronda didn't look up. "You embarrassed yourself. I just didn't add to it." He nodded, accepting that. "I've been trying to unlearn a lot since then," he said. "Harder than learning," she replied. He gave a slight, rueful smile. "Yeah." Later, he left without another word. The mat remained warm where he had sat. Time passed. The small studio continued its quiet work. Every now and then, new faces appeared. One young woman had been assaulted in her previous gym by a coach she'd trusted. Another was fresh out of rehab, rebuilding herself from the ground up. Some stayed only a few weeks. Others became fixtures, their bodies transforming, their confidence recalibrated. They learned to breathe under pressure, to hold their ground, to protect space without apology. Ronda began to let Ryan assist with warm-ups. Nothing formal, no titles, just guidance when needed. He understood his place in the room, not above, not in front, but alongside. There were no belts awarded, no hierarchy to reinforce ego, only the steady rhythm of learning. Back at Forge House, the changes that had begun continued to grow. The energy had softened, not weakened, but evolved. The gym introduced new programs: women's-only open mats, free training for survivors, mentorship pairings for young fighters without family support. Mateo had stepped into a leadership role naturally. He wasn't loud, but he had the one thing Ryan used to lack: humility. On the wall, where Ryan's old poster once hung, a new framed photo appeared. It showed a still frame from the exhibition. Ronda walking away, Ryan on the mat, the crowd frozen mid-realization. Underneath, a plaque read, "Lesson over Legacy." The quote was attributed to no one. In Echo Park, Ronda's studio continued without interruption. She taught, she trained, she healed, and sometimes after class, when the sun angled just right through the windows and the room was quiet again, she would sit on the floor beside the wooden box in the corner. Her mother's photo smiled back at her, faded but resolute. One evening, a journalist managed to find the studio. A woman, thoughtful, well-spoken, respectful. She requested an interview, not about the fight, not even about Ronda's past, but about her work now, her purpose. Ronda declined. "I already said what I needed to," she said. The reporter hesitated, then asked, "Do you feel like you've come back full circle?" Ronda thought for a moment. "No," she said, "I didn't come back. I went forward." That weekend, Forge House hosted a community event, a sparring showcase and open training. Flyers were printed in Spanish and English. Local food vendors donated supplies. The gym was packed with families, old fighters, new students. At the center of it all stood Mateo, running things with quiet assurance. Ronda visited briefly, slipping in during the second hour. She stayed near the wall, speaking with no one. Some people recognized her. A few approached, asked for a handshake, a thank you. She smiled, said little. Ryan spotted her across the room. He walked over slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I didn't come for you," she replied gently. He smiled, and this time it was real. "Still, I'm glad you did." She nodded. "Looks good." "It's not mine anymore," he said. "That's the point." She turned to leave, then paused. "You taught a lot of people how to fight," she said. He looked surprised. "Thanks." She met his eyes. "Now, teach them how to listen." He nodded once. No defense, no comeback. Later that night, she walked home along the quiet streets, her bag over her shoulder, hoodie drawn up against the breeze. The sky was clear. The city hummed, oblivious. There were no bright lights now, no cameras, no chants, no roar of a crowd, only the rhythm of footsteps, the stillness of a path walked with intention, and the understanding that true strength, real mastery, is found not in defeating others, but in facing yourself, over and over again, in silence, in sweat, in patience, in the choice to keep walking, every day, every round, until the noise fades and only the truth remains. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. See you in the next one.